The world's truly miraculous moments do not rely on peaceful conditions. They build legacies of absolute, unbelievable human endurance and survival against all odds. Today, we glimpse into the minds of history's absolute greatest survivors. We will explore explorers who defeated freezing oceans and men who fought off massive wild predators. We will witness ordinary citizens who defied absolute mathematical impossibility to survive plane crashes and desert isolation. We will see completely ordinary people perform absolute superhuman feats of strength just to see tomorrow. Finally, we will reveal a sailor who drifted across the massive open ocean for over a year. Before we dive in, please like and subscribe to Stickman Chronicles right now. Hitting that big subscribe button helps us bring you more high-quality history videos. Do not forget to turn on the notification bell for your daily history fix. Let us start our global journey in the freezing American frontier with the legendary trapper Hugh Glass. The terrifying situation unfolded when he inadvertently startled a massive, completely enraged mother grizzly bear. The massive beast completely shredded his throat and broke his leg in a terrifying display of absolute raw power. His fellow trappers firmly believed his horrific injuries were completely fatal and abandoned him in a shallow grave. They even stole his absolute vital survival weapons completely, leaving him to die alone in the dirt. He woke up completely alone, entirely unarmed, and bleeding heavily in the middle of absolute hostile territory. He refused to accept absolute defeat and set his own broken leg before beginning a massive crawl to safety. He dragged his bleeding body for over 200 miles, surviving entirely on raw wild berries and rotting animal carcasses. He prevented absolute deadly gangrene by allowing wild maggots to completely eat the dead, infected flesh from his wounds. It took him 6 agonizing weeks to finally reach the safety of the nearest remote military fort. His absolute unstoppable vengeance and sheer willpower completely redefined the limits of human physical endurance. Our next glimpse into miraculous survival erupts above the dense, massive Amazon rainforest with Julianne Coepke. The 17-year-old girl was completely strapped into her airplane seat when a massive lightning strike shattered the aircraft midair. She violently plummeted over 2 completely terrifying miles directly into the dense, unforgiving jungle canopy. The thick, massive vines completely broke her fall, saving her life, while every single other passenger tragically perished. She woke up alone with a broken collarbone and absolutely no survival equipment in the most dangerous forest on Earth. She relied entirely on her father's biological teachings to follow a small, winding river, knowing it would eventually lead to humanity. She waded through absolute crocodile-infested waters for 11 brutal days, while wild insects completely devoured her open wounds. She suffered absolute terrifying hallucinations from the massive heat, but refused to completely stop walking down the riverbank. She finally stumbled upon a small, completely abandoned logger encampment and treated her infested wounds using raw gasoline. Her unbelievable biological resilience against absolute impossible odds remains a completely unmatched historical anomaly. Moving to the massive open ocean, we find the terrifying absolute isolation of a young sailor named Poon Lim. His massive merchant ship was completely blown apart by a German torpedo, forcing him to jump directly into the freezing Atlantic. He managed to drag himself onto an 8-foot wooden life raft, completely lacking any absolute long-term survival supplies. When his meager rations completely ran out, he resorted to using a single wire to build a primitive fishing hook. He completely sustained himself by catching raw fish and trapping massive wild seagulls with his bare hands. He drank absolute raw sea turtle blood to completely stave off the massive, terrifying effects of extreme dehydration. He even utilized a massive, heavy wooden plank to completely kill a shark that was circling his tiny wooden raft. He drifted under the absolute scorching sun for an unbelievable 133 days, completely alone. He was finally rescued by a small Brazilian fishing boat, completely shattering the previous human survival record at sea. He proved that the human mind can completely endure absolute, terrifying ocean isolation without completely losing its sanity. Traveling to the vast rocky deserts of Utah, we witnessed the absolute, terrifying entrapment of Aaron Ralston. The highly experienced outdoorsman was completely alone when a massive 800-pound boulder suddenly dislodged. The massive stone violently, completely crushed and pinned his right arm against the absolute solid canyon wall. He spent 5 grueling days completely trapped in a narrow slot canyon, rapidly running out of food and water. He desperately drank his own urine and carved his absolute final goodbye into the sandstone wall, completely accepting his death. He filmed massive, terrifying goodbye videos for his family, completely believing he would never escape the massive rocky tomb. Suddenly, he experienced a massive psychological breakthrough, realizing he could completely break his own bones using mechanical torque. He utilized a completely dull multi-tool blade to amputate his own trapped arm in an absolute terrifying display of willpower. He then rappelled down a massive 60-foot cliff using only one arm to finally reach complete safety. His absolute brutal self-sacrifice remains a completely legendary testament to the sheer biological will to survive. Deep in the absolute freezing wasteland of Antarctica, a moment of pure terror emerges with explorer Douglas Mawson. During a massive sledding expedition, his 2 completely trusted companions tragically fell into a massive hidden ice crevasse. He was left entirely alone over 300 completely freezing miles away from his coastal base camp. His meager remaining sled dogs completely starved to death, forcing him to consume their toxic raw livers to survive. The toxic dog meat caused his skin to completely peel off while his absolute exhausted body began physically shutting down. The bottoms of his feet completely detached, but he simply taped them back onto his skin and kept pulling his massive sled. He completely fell into a freezing crevasse himself and was left dangling over a massive bottomless pit by his harness. He used absolute pure upper body strength to drag his completely frozen body back up the rope to the surface. He completely pushed through absolute blinding snowstorms to finally reach a massive abandoned winter survival hut. He miraculously survived the massive solitary trek, completely proving that the human spirit can conquer the absolute coldest place on Earth. Before we reveal the final 5 greatest survivors in history, please like this video and subscribe to Stickman Chronicles. Your daily support helps us spend more time researching these incredible historical survival stories. Leave a comment right below about which epic survival story has shocked you the most so far. The sheer psychological endurance escalates in the Sahara Desert with the terrifying marathon run of Mauro Prosperi. He was competing in an absolute brutal multi-day desert marathon when a massive, furious sandstorm completely disoriented him. He wandered completely off the marked trail and ended up hundreds of miles deep inside completely absolute hostile territory. He found a completely abandoned desert shrine and resorted to drinking the raw blood of wild bats to stay hydrated. He completely believed he was going to die and slit his own wrists to avoid an absolute terrifying death by dehydration. His blood was so incredibly thick from absolute dehydration that the cuts completely clotted and failed to kill him. He took this as a massive divine sign to keep fighting and walked for 9 absolute grueling days through the scorching heat. He completely buried his body in the massive sand dunes during the daytime to avoid the absolute deadly solar radiation. He survived by eating wild desert snakes and raw lizards before completely stumbling into a small nomad camp in Algeria. His unbelievable intuition and absolute grit completely saved his life when absolutely all hope was completely lost. Across the dark, massive void of space, we witnessed the incredible mechanical survival of the Apollo 13 crew. They were completely scheduled for a routine lunar landing when a massive oxygen tank violently exploded inside their spacecraft. The massive catastrophic explosion completely crippled their main command module, forcing them into the tiny lunar lander. They were over 200,000 miles away from Earth, relying on completely depleted battery power and freezing temperatures. The absolute brilliant engineers on the ground had to completely invent a massive carbon dioxide filter using literally duct tape and cardboard. The three completely exhausted astronauts endured absolute freezing temperatures and extreme dehydration for days in the dark capsule. They had to completely shut down their absolute vital navigation computers just to save massive amounts of electrical power. They successfully executed a massive manual engine burn using the absolute edge of Earth's gravity to completely sling them home. They successfully plummeted back into the Earth's atmosphere and splashed down completely unharmed against all astronomical odds. Their unmatched absolute teamwork completely saved them from drifting endlessly through the massive dark void of outer space. The absolute bizarre limits of human morality were tested by the survivors of the massive Andes flight disaster. A massive chartered airplane carrying an absolute elite rugby team crashed directly into the freezing peaks of the massive Andes Mountains. The initial crash completely killed a quarter of the passengers, leaving the remaining survivors trapped in an absolute frozen wasteland. They heard a massive, terrifying radio broadcast announcing that the official rescue search had been completely abandoned forever. Facing absolute certain starvation, the desperate group made the incredibly traumatic decision to completely consume the flesh of their deceased friends. They completely endured absolute massive avalanches that buried their ruined fuselage and smothered even more survivors in the snow. After 2 entire months of absolute freezing misery, Nando Pardu and a friend decided to hike completely out of the massive death trap. They climbed completely over a massive 15,000-foot glacial peak, wearing absolutely nothing but rugby shoes and ragged sweaters. They walked for 10 absolute grueling days before finally finding a local farmer and completely saving the remaining 16 survivors. Their unmatched absolute sacrifice makes this the most undeniably terrifying psychological survival story to ever occur. Deep in the massive blue void of the Pacific Ocean, we find the absolute terrifying drift of Jose Salvador Alvarenga. The humble fisherman was completely blown entirely off course by a massive, terrifying 5-day oceanic storm. The massive storm completely destroyed his radio and engine, leaving him drifting helplessly in a tiny 24-foot fiberglass boat. He completely survived by catching wild sea turtles and massive seabirds with his bare hands while drinking raw turtle blood to stay hydrated. He endured absolute agonizing psychological isolation as he drifted thousands of miles across the completely empty ocean surface. He completely tracked the passing of time by watching the massive phases of the moon change in the endless dark sky. He frequently had to completely throw himself into the massive shark-infested waters to scrape barnacles entirely off his hull. After an unbelievable 438 days, he finally washed ashore completely alive on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands. He had completely drifted over 5,500 miles, making it the absolute longest recorded survival at sea in human history. His incredible physical survival proves that the human body can completely adapt to the absolute harshest oceanic conditions on Earth. Finally, we arrive at the absolute peak of unbelievable leadership with a massive Antarctic expedition of Sir Ernest Shackleton. His massive reinforced expedition ship, the Endurance, was completely trapped and violently crushed by absolute shifting pack ice. His 28-man crew was completely stranded on the freezing, floating ice floes for months in the absolute dark Antarctic winter. He completely forced his men to maintain absolute military discipline and routine just to keep their minds completely intact. Shackleton completely refused to lose a single man and ordered his completely exhausted crew into 3 tiny wooden lifeboats. They completely navigated through absolute massive, freezing ocean swells to reach the completely desolate Elephant Island. Realizing rescue was absolutely impossible, Shackleton took 5 men and sailed a tiny 20-foot boat across the deadliest ocean on Earth. They miraculously completely crossed 800 miles of massive freezing hurricane waves to reach the massive whaling stations of South Georgia. They then had to completely climb over an absolute uncharted massive glacier mountain range just to reach the completely inhabited coast. He successfully navigated the massive, deadly frozen cliffs without losing a single member of his small, absolute desperate team. He immediately secured a massive rescue ship and completely returned to save every single one of his stranded men. This unmatched absolute determination makes his massive expedition the greatest pure survival epic in human history. These gripping narratives prove that human resourcefulness can shatter the strongest chains on Earth completely. They show us that absolute survival is written deep inside our very biological DNA. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to Stickman Chronicles right now. See you tomorrow as we upload high-quality history videos every single day without fail.